Jesse's grandfather left him three things: a leather satchel that smelled of pipe tobacco, a brass compass that always pointed northeast regardless of where you stood, and a map of a place that didn't exist. At least that's what Jesse thought when he first unfolded the yellowed parchment across his kitchen table. The map showed an island, intricate coastlines, mountain ranges, forests marked with symbols he didn't recognize, and a single red X in the center labeled the archive. Below the map, in his grandfather's shaky handwriting, for Jesse, when you're ready to understand, follow the compass. You'll know when. Jesse wasn't ready. He folded the map, put it in a drawer, and went back to his life, his job at the bookstore, his small apartment, his quiet routine of coffee and crosswords and pretending he was content. But the compass sat on his desk, and every morning it pointed northeast, patient and insistent as a nagging thought. 3 months after the funeral, Jesse lost his job. The bookstore closed, another casualty of the digital age. He spent a week in his apartment eating cereal for dinner and scrolling through job listings that all required experience he didn't have or enthusiasm he couldn't fake. On the 8th day, he picked up the compass. "Fine," he said to the empty room. "Show me." The compass led him to a Greyhound bus station. Jesse bought a ticket heading northeast without asking where it went, and the driver didn't seem to think this was strange. He rode for 6 hours through towns that got smaller and more weathered until the bus stopped at a crossroads that wasn't on any of the departure maps. "End of the line," the driver said, though Jesse was the only passenger who got off. The compass pulled him down a dirt road through a pine forest where the trees grew too close together, their branches interlocking overhead like fingers. The air smelled of rain that hadn't fallen yet and something else, old paper maybe, or distant smoke. He walked for hours. The sun moved wrong in the sky, tracking from west to east as if it had changed its mind about setting. Jesse's legs ached, his stomach growled, but the compass was insistent now, vibrating faintly in his palm. Then the trees parted, and Jesse stopped breathing. The island from the map rose from a lake that hadn't been there moments before, or maybe Jesse had crossed into the lake without noticing, his feet somehow dry on a stone path that emerged from water that looked miles deep. The island itself defied logic. Mountains that shifted perspective as he watched, forests that seemed to contain entire seasons in different groves, and at the center a building that was part lighthouse, part library, part something he had no words for. The archive. Jesse crossed the lake on the impossible path, and the brass doors of the archive swung open before he could knock. Inside, a woman sat at a desk that looked carved from a single piece of obsidian. She was ageless, could have been 30 or 300, with silver hair cut sharp as a knife and eyes that had seen too much. "You're late," she said, not looking up from her book. "Your grandfather said you'd be here 3 months ago." "I didn't know where here was." "No one does. That's rather the point." She finally looked at him, and Jesse felt pinned by her gaze. "I'm Meridian. I run this place. Your grandfather was one of our best cartographers before he retired." "Cartographers of what?" Meridian smiled, though it wasn't entirely kind. "Forgotten places, lost moments, the spaces between what happened and what's remembered." She stood, gesturing for Jesse to follow. "Come, let me show you what you've inherited." The archive was impossible. Corridors stretched farther than the building's exterior suggested, lined with shelves that held not books but bottles, boxes, folded papers, and objects Jesse couldn't name. Each container was labeled with dates, coordinates, and names. "These are memories?" Jesse asked, picking up a small glass vial filled with what looked like silver mist. "Not quite. Memories fade, change, lie. These are places, actual physical locations that have slipped through the cracks of geography, towns that were erased from maps, buildings demolished so thoroughly that no one remembers they stood, islands that sank, rooms where important things happened but no record remains." Meridian took the vial from Jesse's hand. "This, for example, is the kitchen of a small apartment in Warsaw, 1943. A woman named Rivka hid 12 people there for 8 months. All survived the war, scattered across 3 continents. The apartment was destroyed in 1944. No photographs exist. But the space itself, the feeling of it, the weight of those months that remains, and we preserve it. Jesse followed her deeper into the archive, past sections labeled by era and region. The labels made less sense as they went, places that never were but should have been. Locations stolen by cartographic era that disappeared. Your grandfather, Meridian continued, spent 40 years mapping these places. He could sense them, the gaps in the world's atlas where something should be but isn't. That compass you carry was his first tool. It points not to magnetic north, but to absence, to the holes in the world. They reached a vast room filled with empty tables and walls covered in blank parchment. This is your grandfather's final project, Meridian said quietly. He died before completing it. The map of a place that's being forgotten right now in real time. A place that will vanish completely if someone doesn't chart it before the last person who remembers it dies. She handed Jesse a folder. Inside were newspaper clippings, photographs, and notes in his grandfather's handwriting. The clippings told a story. A small town in Nebraska called Millbrook. Population 247 inches its heyday, down to 11 now. The last school closed in 1987. The last store in 2003. The young people all left, the old people died. In 3 months, the final resident, a woman named Ellen Morehouse, age 94, would enter a nursing home in Omaha, and Millbrook would be truly empty. And then, according to his grandfather's notes, it would begin to disappear. Not just be abandoned, but actually fade, wiped from maps, from records, from the memory of the earth itself. The way a word vanishes when the last speaker of a language dies. Why, Jesse asked. Why does it matter if one small town is forgotten? Meridian's expression softened. Because everything that ever mattered happened in small places. Because in that town, someone had their first kiss. Someone buried their father. Someone learned to read. Someone decided to be kind when they could have been cruel. All those moments, all that weight of human living, if no one remembers the place, the moments lose their anchor. They float away like smoke. She placed a hand on Jesse's shoulder. Your grandfather wanted you to have a choice. He never did. He was born into this work, trained from childhood. But you can walk away. Go back to your regular life. Find another job. Pretend you never saw the compass point northeast. Or you can stay, learn to map the forgotten. Become a keeper of the lost places. Jesse looked at the blank parchment on the walls, waiting for a town's final portrait. If I go to Millbrook, if I map it, will it stop the town from disappearing? No, Meridian said gently, but we'll have saved what it was, the shape of its streets, the smell of its air, the particular quality of light at sunset. Future generations, or maybe no one at all, will be able to visit the memory of it here in the archive, to know that it existed, that it mattered. That seems like sad work. All preservation is sad. We only save what's dying. Jesse went to Millbrook. He drove his grandfather's old truck, found the keys in the satchel with the compass on the dashboard and the blank map rolled in the passenger seat. The journey took 2 days, and with every mile, Jesse felt the world growing thinner, as if he was driving toward a place that was already half erased. Millbrook appeared suddenly after a curve in the road, a handful of buildings slouching under the weight of abandonment. The main street was 4 blocks long. Most of the windows were broken. Grass grew through cracks in the sidewalk, but it wasn't quite dead, not yet. Ellen Morehouse lived in the only house with a light on, a small white cottage at the edge of town with a garden that clearly defied the odds. She was waiting on the porch when Jesse pulled up, as if she'd been expecting him. You're Frank's grandson, she said. It wasn't a question. How did you have his eyes and that compass, I'd know it anywhere. She smiled, a expression that had worn grooves in her weathered face. He came here once, 20 years ago. Told me someone would come back when the time was right. I didn't believe him then. Over the next 3 weeks, Ellen walked Jesse through every street, every building, every corner of Millbrook. She told him the stories. The drugstore where Doc Patterson had once prescribed a good meal and Sunday rest more often than actual medicine. The school where Ellen herself had taught 2nd grade for 37 years. The church where her husband proposed during a Christmas Eve service, shocking the congregation. The creek where kids still swam in summer, back when they were kids. The tree where someone had carved initials in 1923 that was still barely visible. Jesse mapped it all. He used his grandfather's tools, the compass, to find the heart of each location, the special parchment that somehow absorbed more than just lines and measurements. He would stand in a place and let himself feel it, the weight of time, the residue of joy and sorrow, the particular quality that made this corner different from any other corner in the world. The drugstore felt like patience. The school felt like potential. The church felt like hope stretched thin but not broken. As Jesse worked, Ellen talked. She told him about her husband, dead 15 years, her 3 children, scattered to Chicago, Portland, and Tampa, with lives too full to include a dying town. She told him about the others who had left or died, each departure making the town a little less real. "Do you hate them for leaving?" Jesse asked one evening as they sat on her porch watching the sun set over empty houses. "No," Ellen said, "you can't hate people for choosing life over nostalgia. My kids visit. They're good kids. But this place," she gestured at the town, "this was my life, not theirs. I can't ask them to love ghosts." "Then why do you stay?" Ellen was quiet for a long time. Someone has to be the last to turn off the lights. Someone has to be able to say, "I was there until the very end. I saw it all the way through." Otherwise, it's like we gave up on it, like we decided it didn't matter. Jesse understood. His map was nearly complete. Another week, maybe less. On the 23rd day, Jesse woke to find Ellen's house dark. He ran across the street, let himself in the door, was never locked, and found her in her armchair by the window, dressed in her Sunday best, hands folded peacefully in her lap. On the table beside her was a note in shaky handwriting. "Jesse, thank you for seeing it. Thank you for remembering. The key to the church is under the 3rd step of the front stairs. Inside, in the basement, you'll find a box with your name on it. Your grandfather left it there 20 years ago. He said you'd need it when the work was done." Ellen, she looked peaceful. Jesse called the number for her daughter in Chicago, then sat with Ellen until the county coroner arrived 3 hours later. He helped make the arrangements, attended the small funeral 5 days later with Ellen's 3 children and 7 grandchildren who had never really known Millbrook but came to say goodbye to the grandmother who had loved it. After they all left, Jesse walked to the church. The key was where Ellen said it would be. Inside, the church was dusty and quiet, full of memories of hymns and weddings and potluck dinners. Jesse found the basement stairs and descended into darkness that smelled of old hymnals and communion wine gone to vinegar. The box sat on a wooden shelf labeled in his grandfather's handwriting, "For Jesse, the last tool." Inside was a journal, his grandfather's journal, filled with notes, observations, and instructions. Jesse read by flashlight, sitting on the basement floor of a church in a town that was no longer inhabited. The journal explained what Jesse had already begun to suspect. Mapping wasn't enough. The final step was witnessing. To truly preserve a place, the cartographer had to stay until it actually disappeared, until the last light went out and the world forgot completely. Only then would the map seal itself, become permanent in the archive, imperishable. "It's not easy," his grandfather had written. "You'll stand in the place you've learned to love, and you'll watch it fade. Buildings will become transparent. Streets will lose their solidity. The air will thin. It takes a day, sometimes less. You'll be the last thing there, and then you won't be. But Jesse, listen to me, this is the most important work in the world. We can't stop places from dying. We can't save them, but we can honor them. We can say, 'I saw you. You were real. You mattered.' That's worth everything." Jesse closed the journal and climbed back into the sunlight. Millbrook looked paler than it had that morning. Jesse spent the 24th day finishing his map. He walked every street one final time, adding the last details, the way the wind sounded, whistling through the broken window of the old barber shop, the exact shade of rust on the post office mailbox, the stubborn dandelions in the school parking lot. As sunset approached, he stood in the center of town, the intersection of Main and Oak, where a 4-way stop sign still stood even though no cars came and waited. It started slowly, like the world losing interest. The buildings at the edge of town faded first, their colors washing out like watercolors in rain. The drugstore became sepia-toned, then gray, then translucent. Jesse could see through it to the fields beyond, and then the fields were closer, as if the building had never been. The church went next, its white steeple dissolving into the darkening sky. The school, the houses, Ellen's cottage with its defiant garden. Jesse stood in the center of the shrinking town and felt his heart break as Millbrook let go of itself. But he didn't leave. He had promised, without words, without quite knowing he was promising. He would be the witness, the last one to see. As full darkness fell, Jesse stood alone on a stretch of empty road that had once been Main Street. The compass in his hand spun wildly, finding nothing to point to, no absence, because the place itself had become absence. Then a shimmer, like heat haze. Meridian appeared, walking toward him through the nothing that had been Millbrook. Behind her, reality stitched itself back together, the regular Nebraska landscape, as if the town had never interrupted it. "It's done," she said gently. Jesse looked down at the map in his hands. It was glowing softly, and as he watched, the glow faded, leaving the parchment sealed, complete, eternal. Every street, every building, every story Ellen had told him, all of it preserved. "How do you feel?" Meridian asked. Jesse thought about it, sad, honored, like I just attended a funeral for something that deserved better. All three are appropriate. Meridian gestured, and a doorway opened in the air, a portal back to the archive. "Come, we'll add it to the collection. And then if you choose, there are other places waiting. Places that need a witness before they disappear." Jesse looked back at where Millbrook had been. The moon was rising over empty fields. In the morning, if anyone drove down this road, they'd see nothing unusual, just Nebraska, just landscape. The GPS would route around a town that wasn't there, had never been there, would never be there again. But in the archive, Millbrook would be eternal. Jesse stepped through the doorway. 5 years later, Jesse had mapped 17 forgotten places, mining towns, demolished neighborhoods, islands eroded by rising seas, a stretch of Route 66 that had been bypassed and then paved over, a refugee camp that existed for 3 years in the 1,940 and was never recorded in any official document. Each one hurt. Each one felt necessary. He had learned the cartographer's trick to love quickly and completely, to give your full attention to a dying thing without trying to save it, to say, "I see you," and mean it absolutely. The archive had grown. Meridian seemed pleased, though she never quite smiled. Other cartographers came and went. Some stayed for decades. Others couldn't bear it after their first mapping. The work required a specific kind of heart, strong enough to witness loss, soft enough to care about witnessing. Jesse had just returned from his latest assignment, a bookstore in Seattle that was being demolished despite protests, a place where 3 generations had found their favorite books when Meridian met him in the entrance hall. "There's someone to see you," she said. In the visiting room, a space that existed for the rare occasions when someone from the outside found their way to the archive, sat a young woman, maybe 25, with a leather satchel and nervous hands. "Jesse?" she asked. "Jesse Chen?" "That's me. I'm Sarah Patterson." She opened her satchel and pulled out a brass compass. This was my grandmother's. Ellen Morehouse was her aunt. I found this in my grandmother's things after she died, along with a letter saying I should follow it northeast when I was ready to understand. The compass spun once, then pointed directly at Jesse. He started to laugh, really laugh, for the first time in months. "What's funny?" Sarah asked, confused. "Nothing, everything." Jesse stood and offered his hand. "Come on, let me show you what your great aunt helped preserve. And then if you want, I'll teach you how to use that compass. To map forgotten places, to make sure they're not forgotten," Jesse corrected. "There's a difference." Sarah followed him into the archive, into the impossible corridors filled with bottles and boxes and sealed maps. As they walked, Jesse told her about Millbrook, about her great aunt Ellen, about the work, about the strange honor of being the last witness. "Does it get easier?" Sarah asked. "No," Jesse said honestly. "But it gets more meaningful. You learn that everything ends But ending and erasing aren't the same thing. We can't stop the endings, but we can stop the erasure. They stopped in front of the map of Millbrook, hung now on the wall of the archive, where thousands of others hung a memorial to every place that had been loved and lost and saved from complete forgetting. Sarah reached out, her fingers hovering just above the parchment. "She's in here?" she asked softly. "My great Aunt Ellen?" "In a way. The shape of her garden, the house she lived in, the town she loved enough to be the last person there, all of it." Sarah was crying quietly. Thank you for seeing her, for seeing it all." Jesse understood. He had had the same feeling when he first saw his grandfather's work in the archive, the overwhelming gratitude that someone had cared enough to preserve what could have been lost. "Do you want to learn?" he asked. Sarah looked at the compass in her hand. She looked at the map on the wall. She looked at Jesse, who carried the weight of 17 forgotten places and stood straighter for it. "Yes," she said, "teach me." And so the work continued. Jesse taught Sarah the way his grandfather would have taught him if they'd had more time. She was a natural, could sense the thin places, the locations that were slipping through the cracks of memory. She mapped a jazz club in New Orleans that had been shuttered and sold, a playground in Detroit that had been paved over for a parking lot, a pier in San Francisco where fishermen had gathered for 60 years before the development came. Other young cartographers arrived, each carrying a compass, each following the call northeast. The archive grew. Meridian, ageless and inscrutable, watched over them all, and Jesse understood finally what his grandfather had left him. Not just a job, but a purpose. Not just maps, but meaning. The knowledge that bearing witness was sacred work, that memory was resistance against the erasure of time, and that love for places, for people, for the weight of human living was worth preserving even when, especially when it couldn't be saved. He stood in the archive sometimes late at night, surrounded by thousands of maps, thousands of places that no longer existed anywhere else in the world. And he thought about all the lives those places had held, all the ordinary, extraordinary moments that would have vanished without trace. But they didn't vanish. They were here, held, remembered. And that, Jesse thought, was enough. That was everything.